Welcome to tonight's episode of Masterpiece Book Talk. I'm Renee Tharrington. Tonight we will be featuring 3 memoirs that are written in verse. So grab a cup of your favorite coffee or tea and let's get into tonight's featured memoirs. What is a memoir, you may ask? A memoir is a narrative story that focuses on events in and as well as other areas of the author's life. First, we will discover Coretta Scott King Award winner Brown Girl Dreaming by Jacqueline Woodson. Next, we will dive in with Michael L. Prince Award winner Ordinary Hazards by Nikki Grimes. And finally, we will venture to a new culture with Purabelle Prix Award winner Enchanted Air, Two Cultures, Two Wings by Margarita, Engel. So let's get started, shall we? Brown Girl Dreaming by Jacqueline Woodson. Have you ever felt like you did not fit in with the others or that you stood out from a crowd? That is exactly how Woodson felt as a young girl. Woodson takes us back to the North and the South in the 60s and the 70s as a female African American. The poems in her memoir tell her life story as she grew up in the North and the South, and she also shares what it was like to grow up during the Civil Rights Movement and Jim Crow era. Let's take a look at one of her poems. There was an excerpt in there that was really interesting. We all have the same dream, my grandmother says, to live equal in a country that is supposed to be the land of the free. You know, this quote really resonates with me, the I Have a Dream speech that Martin Luther King Jr. shared. Growing up, she never really felt like she fit in, or she didn't really feel at home in either place. She dealt with a lot of bullying and teasing for things as simple as the way she spoke. She had certain rules that she had to follow because of how she was raised and taught about her religious background, and her friends never really understood her. Even though she faced adversity, Woodson had a close relationship with her family, and often her family experienced the same trials that she faced, and they were able to work together through them. Next we have Ordinary Hazards by Nikki Grimes. Do you or someone you know suffer from a mental illness? In Ordinary Hazards, Grimes shares her life as a young girl whose mother suffered from paranoid schizophrenia, and she was also an alcoholic, and her dad was not even in the picture for most of her life. So what is a mental illness? A lot of times we don't really understand what that might mean. According to the American Psychiatric Association, a mental illness is a health condition that involves changes in emotions, thinking, or even behavior, or any combination of these things. Mental illnesses are associated with distress and/or problems functioning in social, work, or even family activities. And some statistics are pretty staggering from the American Psychiatric Association also. About 1 in 5 adults in the United States have some type of mental illness. And 1 in 24 has a serious mental illness, such as Grimes' mother, paranoid schizophrenia. And 1 in 12 has a substance abuse disorder that is able to be diagnosed by doctors. So this is a pretty serious thing, and Nikki Grimes gives us really an insight of what her life was like as she dealt with those things. Like many other young adults, Grimes was in and out of foster care, often because of her home life. She was even terrorized by some of her caretakers while in foster care. This meant that she was going to new schools all the time, and she had to make new friends often. So can you think of any ways that you would share your story with others? Grimes found a love for writing at an early age and learning that she could share her experiences through poetry. This book is a great book that offers a story of hope for young adults who may be experiencing some tough times in their life as well. Next we have Enchanted Air, Two Cultures, Two Wings by Margarita Engel. Margarita Engel transports us back into the 1950s and 1960s to the age of the Cold War and the Cuban Revolution. So what happened in the Cold War, you may ask? Well, that was a political conflict between the United States and the Soviet Union, which is what we know now as Russia, that went on for about 45 years. The Cuban Revolution was an armed revolution, or a revolt, in which the government was overthrown and where Fidel Castro led the revolution, and he even formed a government that was more like a communist government. So do you know someone who is from another culture, or maybe who has been separated from their own family? That's definitely something to think about as we are in these modern times today. Growing up in Los Angeles as a Cuban American, it brought its share of trials that Engel had to face. She was even separated from her own family, who live in Cuba because of the revolution. There was a poem in her book that is worth reading. It's called The Dancing Plants of Cuba. In California, all the trees and shrubs stand still, but on the island, coconut palms and angels' trumpet flowers love to move around dancing. Fronds and petals wave in the wild wind. Climbing orchids dangle from high branches. The delicate leaflets of sensitive mimosa plants coil and curl, folding up like the pages of a wizard's book, each time I touch their rooted magic. Maybe I will be a scientist someday, studying the dancing plants of Cuba. She really struggled to find her place in life. But what was interesting was Engel found that reading helped her escape the viciousness of the Cold War and the Cuban Revolution. This book is really great for all readers of all ethnicities because it really gives an insight and shows the difficulties that many Cuban immigrants faced during the Revolution. Well, I hope that you enjoyed tonight's episode of Masterpiece Book Talk. We looked at 3 memoirs that were written in verse. The first was Brown Girl Dreaming, it told the story of Jacqueline Woodson and her life as she grew up in the 1960s and the 1970s, where racism and civil rights were a part of her everyday life. The second memoir was Ordinary Hazards, and this told the story of Nikki Grimes as she grew up in several foster homes with a mother who suffered from a severe mental illness, paranoid schizophrenia, and an uninvolved father. And the final memoir was Enchanted Air, 2 Cultures, 2 Wings. And this told the story of Margarita Engel as she grew up surrounded by the Cold War and the effects of the Cuban Revolution. While each of these memoirs told different stories, each one really showed an element of bravery and strength that the authors portrayed, having faced each experience. Thank you, and good night.